There's a 22-kilometer stretch of land where India is barely wider than Manhattan. And right now, as you watch this, it could be the trigger for South Asia's next war. If this corridor gets cut off, and military analysts say it could happen in under 4 hours, 45 million people would be trapped. No supplies. No fuel. No escape routes. Your phone probably has chips that pass through here. Your morning tea came from fields beyond this choke point. That affordable t-shirt you bought online? The fabric traveled this exact route from India to Bangladesh. Most people have never heard of the Siliguri Corridor. But it's been called India's Achilles heel for 77 years. And 3 weeks ago, something happened that made every defense analyst in New Delhi lose sleep. Let me show you what's really going on. But before we dive in, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment. I subscribe. And I'll personally welcome you into the family. With that said, let's get started. Look at this map. This is the Siliguri Corridor. Locals call it the chicken's neck. It's the only land connection between mainland India and 7 northeastern states: Assam, Meghalaya, Manipur, Nagaland, Tripura, Mizoram, and Arunachal Pradesh. All of them connected to the rest of India by this sliver of land. At its narrowest point, 22 kilometers. You could jog across it in 2 hours. Now let me put this in perspective. If you're standing in the middle of this corridor, you can see Bangladesh on both sides. To your left, Bangladesh. To your right, Bangladesh. You're literally surrounded. This is what military strategists call a geographic nightmare. Meet Major Vikram Singh, 34 years old, stationed at Bagdogra Air Force Station for 3 years. His job is to patrol the edge of this corridor every single day. 3 weeks ago, during a routine 5 a.m. patrol, he spotted something that changed everything. Fresh tire tracks. Heavy vehicles. Multiple sets. On the Bangladeshi side, heading directly toward the fence. But these weren't random. They were parallel. Coordinated. Military precision. He immediately reported it up the chain of command. Within hours, satellite reconnaissance was redirected to the area. Major Singh later told a colleague over encrypted communications, "I've seen border activity for years. Smugglers, cattle traders, illegal crossings. But this felt different. This was deliberate. Planned." Since 1947, since the day India gained independence, this corridor has been a strategic anxiety. The Indian military has maintained 14 classified contingency plans specifically for defending this narrow strip of land. 14 separate scenarios. That's how vulnerable it is. Let me break down what happens if an adversary cuts off Siliguri. 45 million Indian citizens are instantly isolated from the mainland. The Indian Army's entire Eastern Command, one of the largest military formations in the country, gets cut off from resupply. Trade routes collapse. And according to defense economists, the economic damage would hit $12 billion in the first month alone. And here's the part that should terrify you. There's no strategic depth here. No backup route. No plan B. It's either this corridor or nothing. The Bangladesh border is just 22 kilometers to the south. The China border is 60 kilometers to the north through Nepal and Bhutan. If both sides apply pressure simultaneously, the corridor becomes a kill box. But what Major Singh saw that morning was just the tip of the iceberg. Because while the world was watching Ukraine and the Middle East, something quietly escalated right here. And nobody noticed. Until bullets started flying. December 15, 2024. A quiet Thursday morning near the India-Bangladesh border in Cooch Behar district, West Bengal. Rajesh Kumar, 52 years old, woke up at dawn like he'd done for 30 years. He grabbed his tools, walked to his rice field, and started planting. The same field his father planted. The same field his grandfather planted before partition divided this land in 1947. He was 300 meters inside Indian territory, well within the border. The fence was visible in the distance. That's when he heard the crack of the first gunshot. Then another. And another. Automatic weapons fire. The Bangladesh border guard, the BGB, had opened fire from their side of the fence. Not warning shots. Direct fire aimed at the farmers. Rajesh felt the impact before he felt the pain. The bullet tore through his left shoulder, shattering his collarbone. He collapsed into the mud. 2 farmers nearby weren't as lucky. They were killed instantly. 7 others, including Rajesh, were rushed to the nearest hospital, bleeding out in the back of tractors and auto rickshaws. Rajesh survived. 3 surgeries later, he can barely lift his left arm. He told reporters from his hospital bed, his voice shaking, "I never saw the border as anything but a line on paper. We've lived here together for generations. Our grandparents were friends. What changed?" Here's what changed. December 18th, 3 days after the shooting. India deploys 3 additional battalions to the Siliguri sector. That's 3,000 combat troops, armor units, artillery batteries. The entire region goes on high alert. December 22nd. Bangladesh's Ministry of Foreign Affairs releases a statement accusing India of border encroachment and aggressive military posturing. They claim Indian forces are building new fortifications inside disputed territory. January 2nd, 2025. A Bangladeshi farmer is shot dead by the Indian Border Security Force near Malda. Bangladeshi media erupts. Protests break out in Dhaka. January 5th. Indian air defense radar detects the first military-grade drone flying over Indian territory from the Bangladeshi side. Not a hobbyist toy. A military reconnaissance platform. This is what the RAND Corporation calls a creeping escalation. In their 2024 comprehensive study on modern conflict patterns, they found that 68% of wars in the 21st century don't start with formal declarations or surprise invasions. They start exactly like this. Small incidents, provocations, retaliations, each one slightly bigger than the last. The temperature rises 1 degree at a time until suddenly everything's on fire. And the Siliguri Corridor has zero room for these miscalculations. One wrong move, one trigger-happy soldier, one miscommunication, and the entire region explodes. India and Bangladesh have fought before. In 1971, India intervened in Bangladesh's independence war. Since then, relations have mostly been stable. Friendly even. But the cracks have always been there. And now those cracks are widening. But here's what most people don't understand. The shootings, the troop deployments, the drones, those are just symptoms. The real disease runs much deeper. It's not about land. It's about water. Beneath every border tension, if you dig deep enough, there's usually a resource at stake. Minerals. Trade routes. In Siliguri, it's the Teesta River. This river originates in the Himalayas, flows through the Indian state of Sikkim, then through West Bengal, and finally into Bangladesh where it merges with the Brahmaputra. 4 million of farmers on both sides. It's the difference between life and starvation. But here's the problem. India controls the upstream. Dams, barrages, irrigation canals. India regulates when the water flows and when it doesn't. And for the last 14 years, a comprehensive water-sharing treaty has been stuck in political limbo. Let me introduce you to Amina Khatun. She's 43 years old. Lives in Lalminarat district in northern Bangladesh, just 15 kilometers from the Indian border. She's a rice farmer. Or at least she was. I want you to picture this. Amina standing in what used to be her rice paddy. But instead of green shoots and water, there's just cracked, dry earth. The soil splits open in geometric patterns. Dusty and dead. The river doesn't flow anymore, she says, staring at the empty riverbed. My father grew rice here. My grandfather grew rice here. For 8 months a year now, it's just mud and dust. In 2024, Amina lost 60% of her crop yield. Her income collapsed. She couldn't afford school fees for her youngest daughter. 2 of her sons, 19 and 21, had to migrate to Dhaka, where they live in slum housing and work in garment factories for $70 a month. Amina blames India. And she's not alone. Every single night, Bangladeshi television channels run primetime segments with headlines like Indian water theft starving our farmers and the silent genocide, how India controls our rivers. The resentment builds. The anger compounds. And then, inevitably, it spills over at the border. Here's the data. UNESCO's 2024 Water Security Report analyzed 87 transboundary river disputes worldwide. Their finding? Water conflicts increase border militarization by 340%. More than triple. Now think about this from a Bangladeshi perspective. You're a farmer. Your family has worked this land for 4 generations. Your livelihood, your children's future, is entirely dependent on water controlled by a neighboring country. A country that, in your view, is choking off your supply to benefit their own farmers. How long before you stop seeing that neighbor as a friend? Bangladesh has a population of 170 million people, one of the highest population densities on Earth. Climate change is already devastating the country. Rising sea levels are swallowing coastal villages. Cyclones are getting worse. And now, the rivers are drying up. Desperate people do desperate things. And here's where the geopolitics get really dangerous. China has been watching all of this very carefully. And Beijing has been making moves. Over the last 4 years, China has offered Bangladesh over $7 billion in loans. Infrastructure projects, ports, roads, and notably, river management and dam construction projects on the exact same rivers India controls. It's soft power with a sharp edge. China positions itself as Bangladesh's savior while India is painted as the villain hoarding water. If Bangladesh accepts Chinese technical assistance to build counterdams or diversion projects, India's control over the Teesta River gets challenged. The strategic balance shifts. Water was the spark that lit the fuse. But what happened on the night of January 18th? That's when everything escalated to a whole new level. January 18th, 2025. 2:47 a.m. Most of India is asleep. But at the Indian Army's integrated air defense node near Siliguri, radar operators are wide awake. And suddenly, their screens light up. Multiple contacts. Small, low-altitude aerial objects crossing from Bangladeshi airspace into Indian territory. Flying in a tight, coordinated formation. 6 drones. Not the cheap commercial quadcopters you can buy online. These are modified. Larger payload capacity. Longer range. Flying in perfect synchronization like a programmed swarm. The duty officer immediately escalates the alert. Within 8 minutes, the entire air defense network in the region goes active. At 2:55 a.m., authorization is given to engage. Indian air defense systems, a mix of indigenous and Russian origin platforms, open fire. Within 12 minutes, all 6 drones are shot down. Some intercepted midair. Others crash into fields and forests. By sunrise, recovery teams are on the ground, collecting the wreckage. And that's when things get really interesting. Each drone is equipped with high-resolution cameras, thermal imaging sensors, GPS mapping software. When the data is extracted and analyzed, Indian intelligence officers find detailed footage of Indian military installations, troop positions, supply depots, radar locations, vehicle movements. This wasn't some random amateur operation. This was reconnaissance, military-grade intelligence gathering. The immediate question echoing through South Block, India's defense headquarters. Who sent these drones? Officially, Bangladesh denies any involvement. The Bangladeshi government issues a statement saying they're investigating but have no knowledge of any drone operations near the Indian border. But then an anonymous source, a senior defense official, leaks information to the Indian Express newspaper. And the story gets darker. The drones were using Chinese Betaflight flight control firmware. The exact same system identified in Myanmar military drone operations. The hardware? Partially manufactured in Shenzhen. Now, this doesn't definitively prove the Bangladeshi military sent them. It could be a non-state actor. It could be a third party trying to provoke both sides. But the Chinese connection raises alarm bells in New Delhi. Let me zoom out and show you the bigger picture. Since 2020, Bangladesh has signed $1.3 billion in arms deals with China. That's according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the gold standard for tracking global weapons transfers. China has sold Bangladesh frigates, submarines, anti-aircraft systems, radar networks. Chinese engineers are building deep-sea ports in Chittagong and Peira. The Belt and Road Initiative has poured billions into Bangladeshi infrastructure. Now look at a map of the region. If China gains a strategic foothold in Bangladesh, they achieve something India has nightmares about: encirclement. China already controls Tibet and builds infrastructure right up to the Indian border in the Himalayas. If they also have influence in Bangladesh, they bracket India from both the north and the southeast. The Bay of Bengal, India's gateway to Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean, comes under indirect Chinese influence. Major Vikram Singh's unit was the first to reach one of the drone crash sites. He secured the area, supervised the evidence collection, and filed his report. That night, he called his wife on a secure line. She later told a journalist, "He said something I'd never heard him say before. He said, 'This isn't a border skirmish anymore. This is a message. And we need to be ready for what comes next.'" Indian media went into overdrive. Nationalist outrage. Primetime debates. Hashtags trending. Calls for retaliation. Politicians demanding action. But here's what Indian media, for all its noise, is not telling you. The other side of the story. The grievances that Bangladeshis carry. The deaths that don't make Indian headlines. Because if you only hear one side, you'll never understand why this situation is a powder keg. In Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, the narrative is completely, fundamentally different. Let me tell you about Hasina Begum. She's 38 years old. She lives in a small village in Chapai Nawabganj district, right on the border. In August 2023, her 16-year-old son, Arif, woke up early in the morning. One of their cows had wandered off during the night, crossing through a gap in the border fence into Indian territory. It's common. The fence is incomplete, poorly maintained in rural areas. Animals don't understand borders. Arif crossed over to retrieve the cow. He was unarmed. Just a teenager chasing livestock. The Indian Border Security Force spotted him. They shouted a warning. Arif, startled, started running back toward Bangladesh. They shot him in the back. 3 bullets. He died before he reached the fence. Hasina buried her son 3 days later. She's never recovered. When journalists visit her, she shows them a photo of Arif. A smiling boy in a school uniform. He wasn't a smuggler, she says, tears streaming down her face. He wasn't a terrorist. He was a boy, chasing a cow. And they killed him like he was nothing. According to Human Rights Watch's 2024 annual report, the Indian Border Security Force kills an average of 15 to 20 Bangladeshi civilians every year along this border. Most of them are farmers, cattle herders, and villagers. Some are smugglers. The India-Bangladesh border has a massive illegal trade in cattle, electronics, drugs. But many, like Arif, are just people caught in the wrong place. You see, the border fence is a nightmare for the people who actually live there. It cuts through villages. It divides farmland. A farmer's house might be on the Bangladeshi side, but his rice paddy is 200 meters away on the Indian side. The line was drawn in 1947 by British colonial bureaucrats in London who had never set foot in these villages, who had no idea how people actually lived. And now, 77 years later, villagers are still paying the price. Bangladeshi opposition parties weaponize these deaths. They use them to attack the ruling Awami League government, accusing them of being too soft on India. Rallies are held. Slogans are chanted. Indian aggression must be stopped. Protect Bangladeshi sovereignty. We will not be bullied. Nationalism rises. On both sides. Here's a statistic that should break your heart. The India-Bangladesh border sees 947 incidents per year. Shootings, clashes, arrests, smuggling confrontations. That's the highest incident rate among all of India's borders. Higher than Pakistan. Higher than China. And here's the tragic irony that nobody wants to talk about. India and Bangladesh should be the closest of allies. They face the same threats. Climate change devastating both nations. Rohingya refugee crisis spilling over from Myanmar. Islamic extremism. Poverty. Both have nuclear-armed neighbors. Economically, they desperately need each other. India is Bangladesh's largest trading partner. Bangladesh is India's biggest trade partner in South Asia. $14 billion in annual trade. When the land boundary agreement was signed in 2015, resolving decades of border disputes and exchanging enclaves, it was hailed as a model of peaceful conflict resolution. Yet here we are, 9 years later, on the brink again. So what happens next? Where does this crisis go from here? Defense analysts, geopolitical strategists, and military planners have modeled this scenario extensively, and they've identified 3 possible futures. 3 divergent paths. Let's go through them. From nightmare to hope. Scenario 3. The nightmare. Another incident occurs. Maybe it's another drone intrusion. Maybe it's a Bangladeshi soldier killed by Indian fire. Maybe it's an Indian convoy ambushed near the border. Whatever it is, it's big enough that leaders on both sides feel they cannot afford to look weak. India's government, facing elections, sends 2 more divisions to the Siliguri sector. That's 30,000 additional troops. Tanks roll in. Fighter jets are repositioned to nearby air bases. Bangladesh, feeling threatened, formally requests Chinese military observers to ensure Indian forces don't cross the border. China, seeing an opportunity, sends a naval task force to the Bay of Bengal under the guise of freedom of navigation exercises. The rhetoric escalates. News channels on both sides run 24-hour nationalism. Social media explodes with hashtags. Hashtag Defend Siliguri trends in India. Hashtag Stop Indian Aggression trends in Bangladesh. And then, whether by accident or miscalculation or deliberate provocation, the corridor gets blockaded. Maybe it's a skirmish that destroys a key bridge. Maybe it's a strategic decision by Bangladesh, backed by China, to cut off Indian access. Here's what happens next. 45 million people in India's northeast are cut off from the rest of the country. Fuel supplies dry up within a week. Medicine runs short. Panic buying empties grocery stores. The Indian military attempts to resupply by air, but airlifting fuel, food, and essentials for 45 million people is logistically impossible. The Asian Development Bank ran a computer simulation of exactly this scenario in 2023. Their estimate? Economic damage of $12 billion in the first month. And that's just direct costs. Long-term damage would be exponentially worse. Refugee flows begin. Bangladeshi villagers flee the border fighting. 500,000 people pour into Indian West Bengal and Assam, overwhelming local infrastructure. International pressure mounts. The United Nations calls for de-escalation. The United States tries to mediate, but China blocks any Security Council resolution. The conflict doesn't go nuclear. Neither side wants that. But it becomes a frozen confrontation. A new Kashmir. A wound that never heals. That's Scenario 3. Pray it doesn't happen. Scenario 2. The slow burn. Nothing dramatic occurs. No blockade. No invasion. Just more of the same. Border incidents continue. A shooting here. A drone there. Farmers killed. Soldiers wounded. Both governments issue strong statements but take no real action. The Teesta Water Treaty remains unsigned. Bangladeshi farmers continue to suffer. Indian farmers in West Bengal protect their water allocations. Politicians on both sides use the dispute to win votes. Indo-Bangladesh trade begins to suffer. Tariffs increase. Border checkpoints slow down. What used to take hours now takes days. Businesses on both sides lose money. According to the Journal of Peace Research's 2024 study, protracted low-intensity conflicts reduce GDP growth by an average of 4% over 10 years. 4% might not sound like much, but for countries like India and Bangladesh, that's hundreds of billions of dollars. Millions of jobs. Entire futures. Rajesh, the farmer shot in December, still has shrapnel embedded in his shoulder. The doctors couldn't remove all of it. He can't work like he used to. His family struggles. Amina's fields remain dry. Her sons remain in Dhaka slums. Hasina still cries for her dead son. And every year, more names get added to the list. This is Scenario 2. The slow bleed. No winners. Only losers. Scenario 1. The breakthrough. This is the hardest scenario, because it requires political courage, vision, leadership. India and Bangladesh sit down and ratify a comprehensive Teesta water-sharing treaty. India guarantees minimum flow levels. Bangladesh agrees to joint monitoring. Both sides make compromises. Joint border patrols are established. Indian BSF and Bangladeshi BGB officers patrol together, reducing miscommunication and accidental shootings. Economic corridors are expanded. New rail links, highways, and trade routes are built, reducing dependency on the narrow Siliguri choke point. Both nations work together to balance Chinese influence. They don't exclude China, that would be impossible. But they ensure that Bangladesh isn't forced to choose between New Delhi and Beijing. Sound impossible? Like a fantasy? It's happened before. In 2015, India and Bangladesh signed the Land Boundary Agreement. This treaty resolved a dispute that had lasted 68 years. It involved exchanging 162 enclaves, tiny pockets of territory completely surrounded by the other country. Families who had lived in legal limbo for decades finally got citizenship. Land titles were clarified. Border demarcation was completed. And you know how many people died during this process? Not a single casualty. It was hailed internationally as a masterclass in peaceful conflict resolution. Major Vikram Singh once attended a flag meeting at the border. These are periodic meetings where officers from both sides discuss operational issues. He met Captain Karim, his Bangladeshi counterpart. They were roughly the same age. And during a break, over tea, they started talking. Karim mentioned his grandfather was from a village that's now in India. Vikram's grandfather was from a village that's now in Bangladesh. We're guarding a line that shouldn't have divided us in the first place, Vikram said. Karim nodded. Our grandfathers were probably friends. If India commits to helping Bangladesh with climate adaptation, water management, and economic development, the World Bank has projected both nations could unlock a $40 billion economic corridor over the next decade. $40 billion. Millions of jobs. Shared prosperity. But it requires something incredibly rare in modern politics. Leaders who choose long-term cooperation over short-term applause. Dialogue over drama. Peace over popularity. The question isn't whether it's possible. We know it is. The question is whether there's the political will to do it. Now, you might be watching this from Mumbai, New York, London, or anywhere else in the world. And you might be thinking, why should I care about a border dispute on the other side of the planet? Let me tell you exactly why this matters to you. Your smartphone. Look at it right now. Inside are semiconductor components. There's a decent chance some of those components were manufactured in or routed through northeast India. Assam has emerging tech manufacturing hubs. If the Siliguri Corridor closes, that supply chain breaks. Your morning tea. If you drink Indian tea, there's a 60% chance it came from Assam. Assam produces more tea than anywhere else in India. If supplies can't get out through Siliguri, global tea prices spike. Your clothing. Bangladesh is the world's second-largest garment exporter. Billions of dollars of clothing sold in Europe and North America come from Bangladeshi factories. But 40% of the fabric used in those factories is imported from India. Through Siliguri. This isn't just a regional issue. This is a global supply chain vulnerability. When India and Bangladesh cooperate, South Asia thrives. When they fight, China fills the vacuum. And global markets suffer. But beyond economics and geopolitics, let's talk about the human cost. Rajesh Kumar still has bullet fragments in his shoulder. He can't lift his left arm above his head. He can't work his field like he used to. His family's income has dropped by half. Hasina Begum still visits her son's grave every Friday. She's 38 years old and she'll carry that grief for the rest of her life. Amina Khatun's rice fields are still dry. Her youngest daughter had to drop out of school because they couldn't afford the fees. And Major Vikram Singh? He's still on patrol. Every morning at 5 a.m. Watching the same border. Wondering when the next incident will come. These aren't statistics. They're people. Real lives shaped by decisions made in distant capital cities by politicians who will never set foot on that border. We've seen this story before. Kashmir has been a conflict zone for 75 years. Myanmar's civil wars have raged for decades. The Balkans tore themselves apart in the 1990s. Do we really want to watch the same tragedy unfold again? Or do we learn before the catastrophe? So here's what I want from you. Imagine you're the Prime Minister of India or the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. You have the power to make one decision tomorrow. Just one. What would it be? Would you ratify the Teesta water-sharing treaty, even knowing it might cost you votes in your home state? Would you deploy more troops to the border to show strength and force the other side to back down? Would you open secret back-channel negotiations, maybe even involving China, to find a trilateral solution that everyone can live with? Or would you do something completely different? Something nobody's thought of yet? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know. Let's see if we can solve this better than the actual diplomats and generals. And be honest with me. Brutally honest. Do you think India is the aggressor in this situation? Or do you think Bangladesh is playing victim while quietly aligning with China to counterbalance Indian influence? Or do you think, like I do, that the truth is messy and complicated and both sides have legitimate grievances and both sides have made mistakes? Because that's usually how these things work. There's rarely a clear villain. Just scared people making defensive decisions that spiral out of control. One thing is absolutely certain. The world isn't paying attention to this border right now. The media is focused on other crises, other conflicts. But in 6 months, maybe a year, they might have no choice. And when that happens, when the Siliguri Corridor is all over the news, when analysts are trying to explain how we got here, remember this video. Don't say nobody warned you.